Let's talk about the forces that affect trading in global markets and what they are. One of them is sovereign wealth funds. A lot of times, governments hold large stakes in foreign companies. You'll see that France has a large stake in Airbus. They also have a car manufacturer they have a large stake in. A lot of your socialist countries, they view that the company should be owned by the workers, so the government feels they represent the workers in those cases. I leave that for you to make that judgment. It depends who's actually trying to manipulate who in the process. Sometimes you have the sovereign wealth fund, like you have over here in the United States. We have Lucid, which is a high-end electric vehicle, and actually it's being funded. One of the primary stockholders is the Saudi sovereign wealth fund. They hold a large amount. And so, by the way, since they have so much money, there's a high probability that Lucid will always have some type of funding behind it. So it probably will never go belly up because of the sovereign wealth fund that it has in that connection with Saudi Arabia. So that being said, the size of the plans, sometimes in the Saudi case, they're trying to diversify away from the petroleum industry, which may end up being more and more diminished over time, and trying to get into the electric vehicle industry, which is actually a parallel industry in the process. So they're actually getting the best of both worlds. Very clever strategy. So sometimes some of this is about gaining control of natural resources that they need as a nation. And sometimes it's about stripping the company and stealing the technology of it for their own benefit in the process. A lot of times you have social cultural forces that are out there and that are different than what you're used to. You know what? In California, we call fizzy water, we call it soda. If you just go in the United States, you go to the Midwest, they call it pop or soda pop. If you go to the deep South, especially around Georgia, you'll hear that all soda is called Coke, whether it's orange Fanta, so I want an orange Coke. Well, Coke doesn't make an orange thing. No, but they all, because of the fact that Coca-Cola headquarters is in Atlanta, Georgia. You'll see just in one country, you'll have the same product with different names, let alone going to a different country altogether. So you have values, beliefs, rules that are very different. You'll see religion plays a big part on cultural norms as well. You'll see values that are out there. I went to a state, Utah, and in Utah, I walked down the first aisle in the grocery store, and the gal says, "Hi, how you doing?" And I'm waiting for the shtick of her to ask me, that you have this over here. I got a coupon for this. No, she was being friendly. But the next aisle, then some other girl says, "Hi, I'm waiting for the pitch." No sales pitch. I'm from California long enough that I've become a Californian, and I'm used to somebody's greeting you to sell you something, but they were just being friendly. I forgot you can do that. So that means that our culture is very different. So it's a set of values, beliefs, rules, institutions that are held by a group of people. It depends who you are and where you're coming from. If you sit down and do some of the things in America that you go to other countries and you would be considered to be rude and inappropriate. In Japan, they pay people to stand in suits and wear white gloves in the subway stations. And as people are boarding the station, it is common for them to get up behind them and shove them in, shove them in, shove them into the subway cars. That would freak me out because I'd be sitting there face to face with somebody else, a total stranger I never knew, that had to breathe their air 2 inches away from my face because of the fact it's all crowded and everything else. They're used to it in Japan. Their living spaces are much smaller, and they don't have the 18 to 24 inch space that most Americans have. They have a much narrower space because the country is tighter squeezed, and it's part of their culture. It is very different. Some of the traits that you have here in the United States, if you did in Japan, you would be insulting them in the process. If you did some of them over here, the nonverbal communication in the United States is totally different than it is in other countries, anywhere from South America all the way to any kind of Asian country is very different, and the norms and the processes that we have. Sometimes you'll have countries that'll sit down and they'll say different things, and so you have to be careful what you say and how you go about saying them, and also especially if there's a language difference in the process. That makes a big deal. So pay attention to all that when it comes down to it. Pepsi had a "come alive, you're in the Pepsi generation." In Chinese, it's "Pepsi brings ancestors back from the dead." Who wants to see their ancestors sometimes? My mother-in-law, she just died. Yo, it was fun, but no, not really. That being said, KFC, finger looking good. And it was "bite your fingers off" in Japanese. You got to be careful as things translate that you say the right thing. In Turkey, it's rude to cross your arms when you're facing somebody. In the Middle East, if you want to really start and insult somebody and make them angry at you for years to come, Try to shake hands with your left hand. India, never pat anybody's head because that's where somebody keeps their soul. Okay. And you don't want to have a soul brother over there either in the process. So, that being said, in Brazil, your meeting may not start on time because punctuality is not part of the culture. If you start a meeting, you might actually insult somebody if you start it right on time and exclude people in the process. And also, by the way, don't talk business over your meal. Wait until the end when you're drinking something or having dessert. In Germany, use titles all the time. Don't call them by their first name unless you're given permission to. Always provide food and drinks for your birthday. When it's your birthday, don't remove your jacket if your host does. Wear conservative attires. Don't jaywalk. Follow the rules. You must follow the rules in Germany. Okay. Keep your hands on the table when eating. You have all those different cultural things, and that's just one country. And that one country is a fraction of the size of the United States. But they have these traditions going back not just for a year, not just 2 years, but for decades, for centuries even. So be cautious about that because that is part of their cultural norm. And if you want to get along, you need to pay attention to it. The high value of the dollar. It's nice to say, we have a strong dollar. Well, let me tell you, when you have a strong dollar, that issue of import, buy, export, sell is a big thing. Coming from the Midwest, whenever we had a big exchange rate difference between Canada and the United States, we'd have all the different exits going to Canada would be flooded with Americans going to the different gas stations to buy gasoline for their cars because it was about 30% less because of the strong dollar. The Canadians couldn't reciprocate and come back over here and buy goods because their dollar was weaker than ours. So that being said, that exchange rate, it was nice for the Americans because they could buy more things from other countries, but they couldn't sell them to other countries. Strong dollar? No, it's not a good thing necessarily. It depends. You might be able to buy a lot of consumer goods, but you might also lose your job. You choose which is better for you, lose your job or buy goods. So it depends what it is. And then sometimes you'll have these exchange rates that float in the process, and you have that. And that strong dollar will have an impact on foreign tourists, whether or not they come here or you become a foreign tourist and get a good deal from around the world. Sometimes a country will devalue its currency in relation to another one. Japan and China just recently reduced the yuan in comparison to the dollar. They reduced the value so they would actually have more power in their economy and try to revive some issues. You have that. You also have a totally different system of laws between countries. Sometimes you may go to a country and do something that here you may just get slapped on the wrist because it's your first offense. Over there, you end up going to prison. Once upon a time, one of our faculty members sat there and went to an Olympics in another country, and their son found a good deal on tickets for the volleyball game. Yes, here's a good deal. They started selling them, and whoever they bought the tickets from, they were counterfeit. They got into a fist fight. They got picked up and they got put into one of the world's most toughest prisons. And all of a sudden, a 19-year-old kid, a United States citizen, got tossed in with some of the world's biggest drug dealers and killers on planet Earth. They were there for 5 months. I'll bet they learned a good lesson for there while we worked to try to get him out in the process. Legal regulatory forces are different. There are no uniform set of laws across planet Earth. So it depends where you're at. Make certain that you follow the laws of that nation. And if you don't know about it in the process, then deal with it. Some of the most corrupt countries in the process out there, they really have some corrupt business practices. And here are the top 10, the worst places that you never want to go and do business with. Sweet Dreams or whatever. Sweet Dreams was a company that made children's sleepwear, and it was no big deal. The sleepwear had defects in it, like you could actually sit down there and catch on fire really quick and die. Other than that, it's no big deal. So you want to sit down. What would you do if you had a warehouse full of those? Other countries may not have our regulations. We're the ones that put a stop on it. So that being said, what do you end up doing with that? Sometimes you have physical environmental forces in countries with limited transportation and storage systems. When you go to Switzerland, there are 3 languages spoken in Switzerland. You have German, you have French, and you have Italian. Switzerland borders all 3 countries, but they have a physical barrier between the tall mountains between them. So they ended up having a culture that has 3 different languages depending upon where you are and what side of the mountains. you'll have that in Switzerland, which is a highly developed country. But when it comes down to low economic ones, you may even have greater divides on all that. Besides mountains, you may have rivers or whatever, making a big difference. So we talk about different forces affecting global markets. You have four that I want you to know about: the social cultural, the economic and financial, the legal and regulatory, and the physical environmental. Take care.